Hi, this is Dan, First Person Looter, and this is my reaction to the second episode of HBO's television show adaptation of The Last of Us video game of the same title. I'll start simple. I absolutely loved this episode. Again, I've played the game several times and consider myself very familiar with the story. Because of this, I spent more time than I wanted comparing versions in the first episode. I was also spending too much time getting used to what was new. I've had a chance to get more comfortable and accustomed to the changes now. Scene 1. We open similarly to Episode 1, in a completely unfamiliar place compared to the game, Jakarta. However, to those paying attention, Jakarta was mentioned on the 2003 radio in Episode 1. A studious-looking woman is having lunch when military types come for her. Maybe we're all supposed to have known right away, and I'm not really that special, but it was clear to me immediately how this was going to go, and I was right. So while I loved the idea that they were going for, and I thought that they executed it well, I wasn't on edge when I was absolutely certain I knew the next sequence of events, but it was still nice to see those events realized well. I thought the acting was great. I loved the nudity, and I don't say that as some dirty old man who looks no older than 21, thank you very much. HBO isn't new to nudity, obviously. All their biggest shows had tons, Game of Thrones, Westworld, but this is a video game adaptation, and I like that HBO used nudity as another way, on top of the violence and death of children, to make crystal clear that while this is based off of a video game, the show isn't for kids the way people think video games are just for kids. By the way, we let kids see a lot of violence on TV, even if cartoonish, so showing full nudity even down to pubic hair, for me, really solidifies that HBO is taking the grown-up themes of the show seriously. This is not a show for kids. I thought the acting by all involved in this opening sequence was phenomenal. I actually did find myself on the edge of my seat when they asked her what they could do to fight the infection, and her silence was intense. Scene 2. After the credits, the next scene's location felt right out of the game, even though it didn't look like any one specific part of the game. I like how Ellie was placed in a spot of sunlight while Joel and Tess sat outside the ring of light, watching her almost like she's in some invisible cage. It sounded like Joel didn't have as much of a southern drawl in his voice, which was much better for me. I didn't think his accent worked well in the first episode. Most of the dialogue was enjoyable, the matching of wits between everyone. Bella has not won me over yet, but the performance felt decidedly better here, although I'm still uncertain on how I feel about her sarcasm, something that may not have as much to do with the performances as it just feels either rushed or misplaced or not written in a way that works for me 100%. Maybe there's something about this that's lost in translation between a game and a show. I'm not sure what it is, but it wasn't terrible. I still really liked the scene. In terms of cinematography, the quality of the footage looks great. I still far prefer Alexa's look over Red, and also Screw Red for keeping much of raw video hostage, but I don't yet see a style of cinematography that's individual and specific to this show versus other shows. I suppose they aren't looking to have the look of this show come from camera angles and lighting. The look will come from set design, which I hated in Episode 1. I said it multiple times then that Boston's exteriors looked like a film studio backlot. That never changed on my second viewing either, but this episode, Episode 2, did not suffer from that at all. The locations looked great, with the interiors looking the best. Maybe the exteriors looked a tad bit fake to me because we all know the city doesn't actually look like that, but there was still, at least in my head, a sensation of Nuke, Blender, etc. type renders being tracked into the plate of Ellie and Joel and Tess walking on the highway. And again, while I do make films and I am familiar with visual effects, I've still been fooled before, and this didn't fool me, which is a bit of a shame, but it still looked excellent for what it was. I know it sells for the majority of the audience, and it was more than enough for me to thoroughly enjoy it, despite seeing how it was done. The interiors impressed me the most. Finally, walls didn't look like Hollywood walls, propped up and painted by an art department to look weathered. The partially flooded floor was fantastic, it was creepy, and it looked great, and from a filmmaker's perspective, I loved that they put in so much work into this set piece. It takes a lot to create and film in a big body of water, and I had no doubt in my mind that this was all real water, not CGI. And if it was CGI water, even better, it means I was fooled, and that's what I want. In terms of shot-to-shot comparisons, in the game, they waded through water, but it was in the sewers, not a hotel. The first real building they go into above ground is a high-rise, not a hotel, although Joel and Ellie do go to a hotel in the game later on by themselves. They all stick together in the museum in the show, while Joel has long bits of separation in the game, and there was no subway station like in the game. I did love seeing the Golden Dome building in the distance once they made it to the roof, and the wooden board for a bridge used to cross rooftops. But really, I'm trying not to compare the two, the game and the show, as much as possible, and I wasn't doing that as much as I was compared to episode 1. I thought the first bit of real bonding time between Joel and Ellie was so-so. I'm not sure why it wasn't fully working for me, but knowing what the overall show is about, and how we'll watch Joel grow to accept Ellie as a daughter, and for Ellie to accept Joel as a father figure, it made sense. They needed to start somewhere. Scene 3. Outside. Wow. All of those infected. I think this was my first jaw-dropping moment. The environment looked beautiful in the sense that I thought they did a fantastic job, and the amount of infected all on screen at once was at the very least pretty scary, maybe even terrifying. And I must say that while I assume the majority of this shot was CGI'd, either only using some real actors and the rest were CGI, or they duplicated the same small group of actors in different arrangements, as is so often done to make large crowds in film, or perhaps these were all real actors. And credit to the show for doing it so well that I thought it could all be real individual people. But my absolute favorite thing about this scene was the further explanation of the fungal infection. I thought that was a fantastic idea to expand upon how it spreads, not just how the infection can spread from one person to another, but how information can spread amongst the infected. Because this is a video game adaptation, I can't help but compare this to another video game, Days Gone. That too dealt with infected, not zombies, and in that as well, there is a theme of infected sticking to and working together. The big exciting centerpiece of Days Gone was hordes. While you certainly dealt with lots of infected that were roaming around by themselves or in very small groups, scattered throughout the world were hordes of infected that all roamed together, and if one heard you, they all did. But I really like the idea of a root system that literally and physically connects all of the infected together, that immediately and definitely made the world feel far more dangerous. And it's a great payoff to earlier when Ellie was suggesting the world wasn't nearly as scary outside of the QZ as she was led to believe. Certainly as a player of the game, I knew she was wrong about how dangerous the world was, but it was at this point in the show that I realized how much more dangerous the world can be in the show's version versus the game's version. Scene 4. I was so-so on this scene. While I love that they yet again expand on the tendril root system by showing the dried and not safe roots to walk through, I was first excited and then grossly disappointed with the drone shot as they entered the building, because I was really hoping to see the dry roots turn into fresh roots on the roof where our main characters couldn't see. I thought the interiors looked far better than the Universal Studios backlot look of Boston, but when they got to that recently deceased man, I couldn't tell where the injuries were. All I saw was blood. I couldn't tell how he was injured or killed. I didn't know if I should be worried because he showed signs of being bitten by an infected. I couldn't tell if it was a gunshot, and I didn't like knowing because I wanted to be ready to follow what I was hoping would be a scary scene. Unfortunately, I was never really scared in this scene. Maybe it's from playing the game too much. Maybe it's the fact that much of the teaser trailer and a teaser image were from this specific location, but either way, I wasn't terribly scared. And the worst of it for me came when we finally got up close and personal with one of the clickers. I was completely let down with the prosthetics. If someone looked like that at a cosplay event, or if this is what the Blu-ray box set of the entire show looked like, I would be incredibly impressed. I would want to show it off to everyone because I thought it would look like a damn good, gross and scary conversation piece to have in a collection, but it did not look gross and scary and believable enough to be convincing in this world. It looked like a very artistic, big helmet mask that I could see had a lot of time put into the sculpting and painting, but it still looked like a big plastic helmet. It didn't look like an actual fungal growth. I felt it needed to be more wet, more grimy, less symmetrical. I thought it needed to look much more fresh, more natural. I thought the movements of the actors playing the clickers looked great, but they were just really held back by the mushroom helmets they were wearing. Even the killings of the clickers were disappointing. I would see some spurts of blood, but I didn't really feel sold on the destruction that the bullets were doing to their heads. In the game, after you get your second or third headshot with a rifle, the clicker head explodes like dynamite inside a watermelon. And again, I shouldn't compare this to the game. While it is obviously based on a game, television is a different medium. I shouldn't expect it to match the game in every way. Certainly because the creators have said from the beginning it will deviate from the game. I mean, I don't see controller prompts either. I will mention here that this scene is a perfect example of why I agree on the choice to move away from gas masks. I've heard people say to me that it's ridiculous to say Pedro can't act with a mask on because of The Mandalorian, but that's a different kind of show. Here, we need to see faces, and in these scenes, it's even more so. It's not only extremely dark, now they can't even talk. That means communicating to the audience is that much more difficult, and trying to show characters communicating between themselves would be extremely difficult. Scene 5. This was the first time in the show where I thought a direct change from the game was done the best so far. I really thought, based on the casting and the fact that the showrunner said they would deviate from the original story, that Tess would last longer. And my suspicions were further strengthened when they entered and we saw all of the uninfected already shot dead. But the way she went out, I thought was actually far superior than the game. I thought all three actors in this scene acted really well. Yes, I include Bella's performance as Ellie. I'm very glad to see that first major sign in her performance growing on me a bit. While I was a bit confused as to why none of the runners saw Tess immediately, I thought it was quite interesting, even though maybe just a tiny bit confusing, how the one infected did eventually spot her and how they went after her. I have suspicions and hopes that the specific kind of attack will be expanded upon, because you had an elderly wheelchair-bound lady in the first episode who, when seeing a victim, charged at them on the front lawn screaming, whereas this infected individual, while clearly further along in the infection process, still seemed like they were a young, healthy, and robust body capable of moving fast, as all the other runners behind him further illustrated. So why did he not continue running at Tess? He didn't run like he was just running before, he wasn't running the way all the other infecteds were running, and he wasn't running the way the elderly wheelchair-bound lady was running. Why? Even the actress said she didn't expect the scene to play out like that. So I have two hypotheses. One is that one infected person won't attack another infected person, no matter how early in their progression of being infected, versus how an infected person would attack a perfectly healthy person. The other hypothesis is that different stages of infection cause the infected to attack their victims differently. When you're infected after only a couple of hours, like the old lady, you lunge at your victims. But if you've been infected for days or weeks, you attack a bit more slowly, possibly to intimately connect with the mouth tendrils, but that wouldn't really make sense with the clickers who also charged at their victims, and they're some of the furthest along. I will say, however, that it seems to me, many times when a show doesn't specifically show a character dying, there's an episode down the line where it's revealed that that character survived. Now, I'm not sure exactly how that might work here, where she was clearly already infected. There's no cure. You can turn pretty grotesque in just a matter of weeks. The tendrils were definitely entering Tess's mouth, so I don't see how she could possibly survive, but it could be that they run into her again later on and see her fully infected. I also wonder if they will have any flashback scenes or episodes, because again, the actress who plays Tess just seems far too talented to be in a single hour's worth of a show. Or maybe HBO just wants to stamp this with a Game of Thrones Walking Dead seal of approval by letting you know that no character is safe. Bottom line, however, is that I loved this episode. I loved it a lot more than episode 1. I loved the scenes that were so different that there was nothing like that in the game at all. I liked some of the changes to scenes that were clearly taken from the game. I much preferred the performances across the board. I much preferred the look of the locations across the board. I really loved the episode. I was worried I might not like it, not just because of how I felt about episode 1, but because this episode was half the length. But I'm very happy with it, and it gives me a lot more confidence regarding future episodes. And yeah, I'm excited to see episode 3 now, far more than how I felt about waiting for episode 2. And those are my thoughts. Yay!